When you first see Darth Maul emerge from the shadows on Tatooine, when you watch him ignite his double-bladed lightsaber and that crimson blade extends from both ends of the hilt, when you witness the black and red tattooed face twisted in absolute focus beneath the hood, you understand immediately that you're witnessing something different from any Sith who came before. This is not a politician in robes orchestrating from the shadows. This is not a fallen Jedi corrupted by gradual choices. This is a weapon, forged from childhood, designed for a single purpose: killing Jedi. Every movement is calculated, every strike is precise. The acrobatics, the fury, the absolute commitment to violence as an art form. Darth Maul represents the purest distillation of the Sith's desire for revenge, a being who exists solely to bring death to the enemies of the dark side. This is Darth Maul, apprentice to Darth Sidious, assassin extraordinaire, the first Sith revealed to the Jedi in 1,000 years, the warrior whose existence shattered the Republic's comfortable illusion that the Sith had been extinct for millennia. But Maul's story extends far beyond that initial appearance in The Phantom Menace, far beyond the bisection that should have killed him on Naboo. His tale is one of the most tragic in the entire Star Wars saga. A child stolen from his mother, trained in hatred and pain, used as a tool by a master who never truly valued him, discarded the moment he failed, driven to madness by that abandonment, resurrected by obsessive need for revenge, briefly achieving power and recognition, only to lose everything again and again until his final death decades later. To understand Maul is to understand what the Sith do to those they claim as apprentices, to see the cost of being shaped into a perfect weapon, to recognize that beneath the monster was once a child who never had a chance to be anything else. The story begins on Dathomir, a planet of dark forests and darker magic, home to the Nightsisters, a coven of witches who wielded the Force in ways that made even the Jedi uncomfortable. The Nightsisters didn't speak of light and dark sides. They practiced what they called magick, manipulation of the Force through spells and rituals passed down through generations. The males of Dathomir's dominant species, the Dathomirian Zabraks, were called Night Brothers. They lived separately from the Nightsisters, serving as warriors and servants, selected by the witches when their strength or genetic traits were desired for breeding purposes or specific tasks. The society was matriarchal, with the women holding all real power and the men existing primarily as tools to be used. Maul was born in 54 before the Battle of Yavin, the son of Mother Talzin, the most powerful Nightsister and the leader of her coven. As Talzin's child, Maul held a privileged position among the Night Brothers, though he was still male in a society that valued males only for their utility. He had two brothers, Savage Opress and Feral, fellow Night Brothers who would play crucial roles in his later life. Maul's childhood was spent training as a warrior, learning the combat techniques passed down among Dathomir's fighters, being prepared to serve his mother and the Nightsisters in whatever capacity they deemed necessary. But Maul's fate changed when he was still very young, when a visitor came to Dathomir seeking knowledge and power. Darth Sidious, the Dark Lord of the Sith, who publicly served as a politician in the Galactic Republic, had formed an alliance with Mother Talzin. The relationship was complex, built on mutual benefit, but no genuine trust. Sidious wanted to learn Nightsister magic, to understand their unique approach to the Force, and incorporate useful elements into his own dark side mastery. Talzin wanted Sith knowledge, wanted to learn the techniques and philosophies that had allowed the Sith to operate in secret for a millennium, while accumulating incredible power. They met regularly, exchanged teachings, and Talzin began hoping that she might become Sidious's apprentice, that he might elevate her to become a true Sith Lord. When Sidious arrived on Dathomir for one of these visits, the Night Brothers were being tested in what was called the Selection, a competition to determine which warriors were worthy of special attention. Maul had been forbidden from participating, kept locked away for reasons that aren't entirely clear in canon. But when the day came, when Sidious walked among the competing Knight brothers evaluating their potential, Maul used the dark side of the Force to break down his door. He couldn't be held back. He wouldn't accept being denied this opportunity to prove himself. At the selection arena, Maul witnessed his keeper mistreating his brothers, savage and feral. Something snapped inside him. In a burst of rage that drew directly on the dark side, Maul used Force choke on his keeper, lifting the man off the ground, crushing his throat while Sidious and Talzin watched. The display of raw power, of instinctive connection to the dark side in one so young, immediately captured Sidious's attention. The Sith Lord declared Maul the winner of the selection and announced that he would take the boy as his apprentice. For Mother Talzin, this was devastating betrayal. She'd hoped to become Sidious's apprentice herself, to gain the power and knowledge that came with being a Sith Lord. Instead, Sidious was taking her son, stealing him away from Dathomir, from his family, from everything he'd known. She protested, but ultimately was powerless to prevent it. Sidious was far too strong, and he'd made his choice. He left Dathomir with young Maul, and Talzin swore she would have her revenge one day, that she would get her son back and make Sidious pay for what he'd taken from her. For Maul, being taken by Sidious meant the end of one life and the beginning of another. His birth name, whatever it had been, was stripped away or forgotten. He became simply Maul, eventually to be christened Darth Maul when Sidious deemed him worthy of the Sith title. The training that followed was beyond anything experienced by Jedi Padawans or even by most Sith apprentices throughout history. Sidious had a specific purpose in mind for Maul. The boy wasn't being trained to eventually overthrow his master and claim the Sith legacy, as tradition dictated. Maul was being trained as an assassin, a weapon to be unleashed when Sidious's grand plan required Jedi to die. The Rule of Two, established by Darth Bane a millennium earlier, stated that only two Sith should exist at any time. A master and an apprentice, no more, no less. The master embodied power while the apprentice craved it, ensuring constant challenge and growth. When the apprentice became strong enough to overthrow the master, they would do so and take their own apprentice, continuing the cycle. But Sidious bent this rule. He was still apprenticed to Darth Plagueis when he began training Maul, making Maul a secret even from Plagueis initially. The older Sith Lord eventually learned of Maul's existence and allowed it because Maul was clearly being trained as an assassin rather than a true Sith Lord, meaning he didn't violate the Rule of Two's spirit. Maul's training was merciless. Sidious believed that pain created strength, that suffering refined warriors, that near-death experiences taught lessons ordinary instruction couldn't match. He threw Maul into situations designed to push him to absolute limits. The young Zabrak was sent to hunt dangerous creatures across hostile worlds, forced to survive with minimal resources, pitted against opponents who should have been far beyond his abilities. Every failure resulted in punishment. Every success raised the bar higher for next time. There was no praise, no affection, no acknowledgement that Maul was anything more than a tool being sharpened for eventual use. One particularly telling incident occurred when Sidious sent Maul to the swamp planet Tuon Keti to hunt Rathtars, creatures with multiple tentacles and insatiable appetites that hunted in packs. Maul tracked them, lured them using hired hunters as bait, killed the beasts with precision and efficiency. But what stayed with him afterward wasn't pride in the accomplishment, it was envy. The Rathtars, for all their vicious nature, were free. They served no master. They killed because it was their nature, not because someone commanded them. Maul, for all his growing power, was owned. Everything he did served Sidious's purposes. He had no autonomy, no choice, no life beyond what his master permitted. Sidious also took Maul to Malachor, an ancient Sith world where a great battle had occurred millennia earlier. The planet housed a Sith temple constructed around a superweapon, and the ground itself was littered with the petrified remains of Jedi, and Sith who'd died when the weapon activated. Sidious made Maul breathe. The ashes of those long-dead Sith inhale the residue of dark side power that saturated Malachor. The experience gave Maul visions, showed him fragments of ancient conflicts, connected him to the legacy of hatred and violence that defined the Sith Order. It was meant to make him understand that he was part of something larger, that his purpose transcended his individual existence. Throughout this training, Maul learned lightsaber combat at a level few Jedi or Sith ever achieved. His primary form was Juyo, also known as Form 7, the most aggressive and controversial of the 7 traditional lightsaber combat forms. Juyo emphasized relentless attack, overwhelming opponents through sheer ferocity and unpredictability. It drew on the user's emotions, channeling rage and hatred into devastating physical attacks. The Jedi Order had banned Juyo for most of their history, fearing it would lead practitioners to the dark side. The Sith had no such reservations. For them, Juyo was perfect, a combat style that embraced everything they represented. But Maul didn't stop with Juyo. He also mastered Niman, Form 6, a balanced style that incorporated elements from all previous forms. Niman was often dismissed as the diplomat's form because it didn't excel in any particular area, making it versatile but less specialized than other styles. However, Maul's version of Niman was anything but weak. He used it to adapt to different opponents, switching between aggressive and defensive techniques as situations demanded. He also learned Jarkai, the technique of fighting with 2 lightsabers simultaneously, and incorporated Tereskesi, an unarmed martial art specifically developed to fight Force users. The combination made Maul extraordinarily dangerous in any combat scenario. Maul's signature weapon was unlike any lightsaber the Jedi had encountered in living memory. Following instructions from a Sith holocron belonging to Sidious, Maul constructed a double-bladed lightsaber, also called a saber staff. The weapon consisted of 2 lightsaber hilts connected end to end, with focusing crystals bled to produce the characteristic Sith red blades extending from both ends. The design granted enormous advantages. Maul could attack from multiple angles simultaneously, could spin the weapon to create an impenetrable defensive barrier, could surprise opponents who'd never faced such a weapon before. The double-bladed configuration also perfectly complemented his acrobatic fighting style, turning him into a whirlwind of lethal strikes that few could defend against. The weapon's construction was a rite of passage, a moment when Sidious deemed Maul ready to wield a true Sith weapon. The lightsaber required Kyber crystals, and obtaining them meant killing a Jedi and taking their lightsaber or finding natural crystals and corrupting them through the Force. Maul's crystals were bled, transformed from their natural state into instruments of the dark side through a process of channeling hatred and pain into the crystalline matrix until it cracked and turned red. The bleeding process was as much about Maul accepting his identity as a Sith as it was about creating a weapon. When he ignited those crimson blades for the first time, he was no longer just an apprentice in training. He was Darth Maul, Sith assassin, ready to be unleashed upon the Jedi. Before his first major mission, Sidious sent Maul on various assignments to test his readiness. One involved infiltrating the criminal organization Black Sun and assassinating its leaders. The Vigos who controlled Black Sun had connections to the Trade Federation and had been involved in attempts against Darth Plagueis himself. Sidious wanted them eliminated, wanted Black Sun thrown into chaos so he could eventually reshape it for his own purposes. Maul was given the Scimitar, a modified star courier equipped with a cloaking device and advanced weapons systems. He confessed to Sidious that he didn't feel deserving of such a ship. His master told him to prove his worth through success. Maul succeeded spectacularly. He tracked down each Vigo in turn, killed them in ways that sent messages to the rest of Black Sun's leadership, dismantled their organization with surgical precision. But the mission also revealed something about Maul's nature. When he encountered beings who weren't his assigned targets, beings who happened to witness his presence or interfere with his mission. He killed them without hesitation. He didn't report these additional deaths to Sidious, understanding that his master wanted efficiency and results, not unnecessary casualties that might draw attention. Maul was learning to operate independently, to make tactical decisions based on mission requirements rather than simply following orders precisely. Another mission involved working with a Force-sensitive criminal named Zek Pero to intercept Skarn shipments. Skarn was a valuable commodity, and controlling its distribution meant controlling significant wealth and influence. Maul and Pyro fought the Skarn buyers together, acquired the shipments, accomplished the mission's objectives. Then Maul killed Pyro with a piece of metal, leaving no witnesses, returning to Sidious alone. His master expressed concern about Maul's methods, suggested he was acting as foolishly as Pyro had. The comment was characteristic of Sidious's approach to training. Maul had succeeded perfectly, killed the only person who could testify about a Sith apprentice operating in the galaxy, eliminated a potential future problem. But Sidious framed it as a failure, as foolishness, keeping Maul uncertain, preventing him from developing confidence that might lead to challenging his master's authority. Through all of this, Maul never received affection or genuine approval. Sidious was incapable of such emotions, or at least unwilling to express them. The relationship between master and apprentice was transactional, utilitarian, built entirely on Maul's usefulness as a weapon. There were no conversations about philosophy beyond what was necessary for missions. No exploration of Maul's thoughts or feelings. No acknowledgement of him as a person rather than a tool. This absence shaped Maul profoundly, created a being who understood violence and purpose, but not connection or belonging. He was loyal to Sidious not from love or even respect, but because Sidious was his entire world, because everything Maul knew how to be was defined by his master's training and commands. The moment Maul had been preparing for his entire life arrived in 32, before the Battle of Yavin. Sidious, operating publicly as Senator Palpatine of Naboo, had orchestrated a crisis. The Trade Federation, secretly controlled by the Sith Lord, established a blockade of Naboo, invading the peaceful planet to force Queen Amidala into signing a treaty that would legitimize the occupation. The plan had multiple layers. Publicly, Palpatine appeared to be helping Amidala fight the Trade Federation, building political capital that would eventually make him Supreme Chancellor. Secretly, he was directing both sides of the conflict, ensuring outcomes that served his ultimate goal of destroying the Republic from within and replacing it with his empire. The Jedi Council sent 2 knights to negotiate with the Trade Federation, Qui-Gon Jinn and his Padawan Obi-Wan Kenobi. Their presence complicated Sidious's plans. If the Jedi successfully resolved the crisis before it escalated, the political opportunities Sidious was cultivating would evaporate. He dispatched Darth Maul with clear orders. Kill the Jedi, ensure Amidala remained in danger, prevent any peaceful resolution to the Naboo crisis. For Maul, this was the culmination of everything. Since childhood, he'd been told the Jedi were enemies of the Sith, that they'd driven the Sith into hiding a millennium ago, that they served the corrupt Republic and needed to be destroyed. Now he would finally face them, would prove himself worthy of his training, would kill representatives of the Order that his entire life had been built to oppose. Maul tracked the Jedi to Tatooine, where they'd landed for ship repairs with Queen Amidala. His first encounter with Qui-Gon was brief, but significant. The Jedi Master was returning to the ship when Maul attacked, revealing himself deliberately, igniting his lightsaber to announce his presence. Qui-Gon barely escaped, recognizing immediately that he was facing something unprecedented. The attack style, the red lightsaber, the absolute commitment to killing. This wasn't a dark Jedi or a fallen knight. This was something else entirely. Qui-Gon reported to the Council that he'd been attacked by a warrior trained in Jedi arts, though he couldn't yet identify the attacker as Sith. The Jedi Masters were troubled, but not yet alarmed. Surely the Sith couldn't have returned after 1,000 years without the Order knowing. The true confrontation came on Naboo after Amidala returned to her homeworld with the Jedi to fight the Trade Federation occupation. Maul was waiting in the Theed Royal Palace Generator Complex, a vast facility with massive reactor chambers and narrow catwalks suspended over seemingly bottomless shafts. When Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan arrived protecting the Queen, Maul revealed himself fully. He threw back his hood, fixed them with a stare of absolute focus, and ignited his double-bladed lightsaber. The weapon extended from both ends, crimson blades humming with barely restrained power. The Jedi had never seen such a weapon in actual combat. They realized immediately they were facing a master duelist, someone trained specifically to kill Jedi, someone who represented a threat beyond anything they'd prepared for. The duel that followed was one of the most significant lightsaber battles in galactic history. Maul fought both Jedi simultaneously, his saber staff spinning in complex patterns, attacking from multiple angles, forcing them to defend desperately while he pressed the offensive relentlessly. His Juyo style was perfectly suited to the weapon and the situation, creating chaos that prevented the Jedi from coordinating effectively. He used the environment expertly, the narrow catwalks limiting the Jedi's mobility, while his smaller stature and acrobatic abilities let him move freely. He was faster than either Jedi, more aggressive, willing to take risks they couldn't match. At one point, the combatants were separated by security laser gates that activated in sequences, creating temporary barriers. Maul was trapped in a small space between two gates, forced to wait while they cycled. Qui-Gon was similarly isolated, while Obi-Wan was stuck several gates back, unable to reach his master. The moment the gates deactivated, Maul attacked with everything he had. The assault was devastating, overwhelming Qui-Gon's defenses through sheer ferocity. Maul struck the Jedi Master's lightsaber aside and drove his blade through Qui-Gon's torso, killing him almost instantly. The Jedi fell, and Maul stood over his body, savoring the victory for a brief moment before Obi-Wan arrived. What happened next should have been Maul's complete triumph. Obi-Wan, consumed by rage and grief over his master's death, attacked with fury that drew on the dark side, channeling emotions the Jedi taught him to avoid. But emotion without control made him predictable. Maul disarmed him easily, knocking his lightsaber over the edge into the reactor shaft below, then used the Force to push Obi-Wan himself over the edge. The Padawan barely caught the edge, hanging suspended over the void, helpless. Maul stood above him, lightsaber raised for the killing blow. He'd won. He'd killed a Jedi Master, and was about to kill the Padawan. His mission was complete, except Maul made a mistake. Instead of immediately killing Obi-Wan, he paused. Perhaps he wanted to savor the moment. Perhaps he was too confident in his victory to bother hurrying. Perhaps he simply didn't perceive a disarmed hanging Padawan as a threat. But in that pause, Obi-Wan reached out through the Force, called Qui-Gon's lightsaber to his hand, leaped up from the shaft, and sliced Maul across the torso in a single perfect strike. The double-bladed lightsaber was cut in half along with its wielder. Maul fell, bisected at the waist, tumbling down into the reactor shaft. His body disappeared into the depths, and the Jedi presumed him dead. Sidious, monitoring the battle remotely, also assumed Maul had been killed. The apprentice had failed his mission and paid the ultimate price. Except Maul didn't die. His hatred, his absolute refusal to accept defeat, his fury at being cut down when victory had been certain, all of it fed into the dark side and kept him alive. The Sith could use the Force to sustain themselves beyond normal limits, to postpone death through sheer will. Maul clung to life through hatred, specifically through hatred of Obi-Wan Kenobi, the Padawan who'd killed him. His body was ejected with the station's refuse, dumped onto garbage transports, eventually deposited on Lotho Minor, a junk world where the refuse of countless systems accumulated. There, in the depths of the garbage piles, Maul's body was scavenged and left to rot among the trash. The suffering Maul experienced during this period is difficult to comprehend. His lower body was gone, severed at the waist. The wounds had somehow been cauterized by the lightsaber strike, preventing him from bleeding to death, but the pain was constant and overwhelming. He had no legs, no way to move effectively, no access to medical care or sustenance beyond what he could scavenge from the garbage around him. His connection to the Force kept him alive, but couldn't repair the catastrophic injuries. Worse, his mind began fragmenting under the strain. Maul constructed crude replacement legs from mechanical scraps he found in the junk piles. Using the Force and whatever tools he could scavenge, he built himself a spider-like lower body with 6 mechanical legs, creating a horrifying hybrid of flesh and metal that let him move through the garbage but marked how far he'd fallen from the proud Sith warrior he'd been. He survived by eating vermin, creatures that lived in the junk, anything that provided nutrition enough to keep his body functioning. But his mind deteriorated rapidly. The combination of pain, isolation, abandonment, and the dark side presence saturating his being broke something fundamental. Maul descended into madness, screaming at shadows, talking to himself, losing coherent thought for extended periods, becoming a broken thing that existed but no longer truly lived. Sidious never came for him. Mother Talzin, using her Nightsister magic to monitor the Force, knew Maul had survived, but was powerless to reach him. He was trapped on Lotho Minor, forgotten by the galaxy, drowning in garbage and insanity. For over a decade, Maul existed in this state. A cautionary tale about what happened to failed Sith apprentices, about the cost of losing to Jedi, about the utter lack of compassion that defined the dark side. Sidious had already taken a new apprentice, Count Dooku, now christened Darth Tyrannus. The rule of 2 continued without Maul. He was simply discarded, left to suffer in obscurity, irrelevant to his former master's grand plans. Maul's resurrection came in 20 before the Battle of Yavin, during the Clone Wars that were tearing the galaxy apart. Mother Talzin sent Savage Opress, Maul's brother, to find him. Savage had his own complicated story. He'd been taken by the Nightsisters, enhanced through their magic, and given to Count Dooku as an apprentice in a plot to eventually destroy the Sith Lord. That plan failed, leaving Savage as a dark side warrior without a true master, searching for purpose. Talzin gave him that purpose. Find your brother. Bring him home. Restore him to sanity and power. Savage traveled to Lotho Minor following Talzin's visions, searching through the junk for his lost brother. When he finally found Maul, the sight was horrifying. His brother was barely recognizable, mad and broken, his spider-like lower body clicking and scraping, his mind shattered. Maul didn't recognize Savage initially, couldn't form coherent sentences, rambled about his lost legs and the Jedi who'd destroyed him. But somewhere beneath the madness, he recognized his brother's presence. The connection to family, to someone who'd known him before his fall, sparked something. Not recovery, not yet. But awareness, recognition that he wasn't entirely alone. Savage brought Maul back to Dathomir, to Mother Talzin and the few Nightsisters who remained. The planet had been devastated during the Clone Wars, attacked by the Separatists on Count Dooku's orders. The Nightsister coven nearly wiped out. But Talzin survived, and she still possessed her magic, still could manipulate the Force in ways the Jedi and Sith couldn't replicate. She performed a ritual, using dark side energy and Nightsister spells to restore her son's mind and body. The broken spider legs were replaced with proper cybernetic prosthetics, powerful mechanical limbs that would serve him far better than his improvised replacements. The fractured mind was pieced back together, memories restored, sanity returned, though the scars of madness never entirely disappeared. When Maul woke from the ritual, truly conscious for the first time in over a decade, his first words were about revenge. His first thoughts were of Obi-Wan Kenobi. Everything else, all his training, all his purpose as a Sith apprentice, all the missions and victories, meant nothing compared to the burning need to make the Jedi who'd cut him in half suffer. Revenge consumed him more thoroughly than the dark side ever had. It became his reason for existing, the sole focus that gave his life meaning. He would find Kenobi, would make him pay, would destroy everything the Jedi cared about before finally killing him. This wasn't about serving the Sith anymore. This was personal. Maul took Savage as his apprentice, teaching his brother the ways of the dark side, training him in lightsaber combat, molding him into a warrior who could stand beside Maul in his quest for revenge. Together they began hunting Obi-Wan, luring him by slaughtering innocents on the planet Raydonia, leaving a trail of bodies that would draw the Jedi's attention. When Kenobi and a fellow Jedi Master, Adi Gallia, arrived to investigate, Maul sprung his trap. The duel was intense, brutal. Savage and Maul fought together with coordination that came from their blood connection, overwhelming the Jedi through numbers and ferocity. Gallia died during the battle, killed by Savage. But Kenobi escaped, cutting off one of Savage's arms before fleeing. The brothers survived the encounter, but failed to kill their primary target. Maul's rage intensified. Revenge remained unfulfilled. The brothers' next move was more ambitious. They couldn't simply hunt Kenobi indefinitely. The Jedi would eventually corner them, and even Maul's skills had limits against the entire order. They needed resources, allies, power. Maul decided to build a criminal empire, to create an organization that could challenge the Republic directly. His first targets were pirate crews, mercenary bands, small-time criminals who could be intimidated or impressed into following him. They captured the pirate Hondo Ohnaka's crew, or at least part of it, and convinced them to join Maul's cause. But more was needed. Maul made contact with Death Watch, a Mandalorian terrorist organization that wanted to overthrow Duchess Satine Kryze's peaceful government and return Mandalore to its warrior traditions. Death Watch was led by Pre Vizsla, a skilled fighter who wielded the darksaber, an ancient black-bladed lightsaber with tremendous significance to Mandalorian culture. Vizsla was initially skeptical of working with dark side force users, but Maul offered something irresistible: help conquering Mandalore. The alliance was born, though both sides understood it was temporary, built on mutual benefit rather than trust. Together, Maul, Savage, and Death Watch recruited more criminal organizations. The Black Sun Syndicate, which Maul had dismantled on Sidious's orders years ago, was rebuilt under his leadership. The Pike Syndicate, controllers of spice trafficking, joined the alliance. Even the Hutt cartel sent representatives, though they eventually decided not to fully commit. Maul called this coalition the Shadow Collective, a network of criminals, terrorists, and dark side users united under his command. It was the foundation for the power he'd been denied as Sidious's discarded apprentice. The Shadow Collective executed Maul's plan to conquer Mandalore with precision. Death Watch staged attacks on Sundari, the capital, creating chaos and fear. Then they heroically intervened to stop the attacks they'd orchestrated themselves, positioning themselves as saviors. Duchess Satine, unwilling to use violence even to defend her government, was overthrown. Death Watch assumed control of Mandalore, and Pre Vizsla prepared to rule as the planet's new leader. Except Maul had no intention of allowing that. He'd helped Death Watch conquer Mandalore for his own purposes, not to make Vizsla a king. Maul challenged Vizsla to single combat for leadership of Death Watch, invoking an ancient Mandalorian tradition that granted rulership to whoever defeated the current leader in fair combat. Vizsla accepted, confident he could defeat the Zabrak despite Maul's reputation. The duel was fierce. Vizsla was an expert fighter, his darksaber techniques honed through years of training. But Maul was operating on a different level entirely. His experience fighting Jedi, his Sith training, his years of survival and suffering, all translated into combat ability that Vizsla simply couldn't match. Maul defeated him decisively, then executed him without mercy, taking the darksaber as his prize. By Mandalorian law, Maul was now the rightful ruler of Death Watch, and, by extension, Mandalore itself. Not all of Death Watch accepted this. A faction led by Bo-Katan Kryze, Duchess Satine's sister and Vizsla's lieutenant, refused to follow a non-Mandalorian Force user. They rebelled immediately, escaping Sundari to form a resistance against Maul's rule. But the majority of Death Watch accepted the outcome, and Maul had Mandalorian warriors serving him. More importantly, he had Satine as a prisoner, and he knew exactly how to use her. The Duchess was important to Obi-Wan Kenobi personally. They'd developed feelings for each other during the Clone Wars, a connection that violated Jedi teachings about attachment, but existed nonetheless. Maul sent word to Kenobi that he held Satine, knowing the Jedi would come. When Obi-Wan arrived on Mandalore with a small team, he walked directly into Maul's trap. The Sith had no interest in killing Kenobi quickly. That would be insufficient revenge for being bisected and left to rot in garbage for a decade. Maul wanted Kenobi to suffer, wanted him to experience the kind of loss that had defined Maul's existence. He brought the Jedi before Duchess Satine, let them speak, let Kenobi believe he might be able to save her. Then Maul ignited his lightsaber and drove it through Satine's torso while Obi-Wan watched, helpless, imprisoned by Mandalorian guards. The Duchess died in Kenobi's arms, her final words expressing love the Jedi couldn't reciprocate. Maul had taken from Kenobi something precious, had inflicted emotional devastation that would scar the Jedi permanently. The revenge was exquisite, but Maul's triumph was short-lived. Word of his conquest of Mandalore reached Darth Sidious, and the Sith Master was displeased. Maul had violated fundamental rules by claiming apprentices and building a power base without Sidious's permission. He'd drawn attention to himself, risked exposing the Sith's continued existence more broadly, and demonstrated ambition that threatened Sidious's own plans. The Dark Lord traveled to Mandalore personally, breaking through Maul's forces with contemptuous ease. When Sidious confronted Maul and Savage in the throne room, the brothers attacked together, believing their combined strength might be sufficient. They were wrong. Sidious was operating on an entirely different level. He'd been a Sith Lord for decades, had mastered the dark side more completely than perhaps any who came before, had trained and killed multiple apprentices over his long career. Maul and Savage together couldn't touch him. Sidious toyed with them, deflecting their strikes effortlessly, demonstrating that everything Maul had learned, every technique he'd mastered, was something Sidious already knew and could counter perfectly. The fight ended with Savage dead, killed by Sidious's lightsaber, and Maul on his knees, begging for mercy. Sidious didn't kill Maul immediately. That would be wasteful. Instead, he explained that Maul had been trained to be a tool, an expendable assassin, never meant to become a true Sith Lord. His role had been to serve Sidious's purposes until he failed, and then to be replaced by someone more useful. The revelation was devastating. Maul had believed, or perhaps hoped, that he might one day overthrow Sidious and claim the Sith legacy as tradition dictated. But Sidious had never seen him as a true apprentice, only as a disposable weapon. Count Dooku was the real apprentice, trained in Sith philosophy and political manipulation, groomed to help destroy the Jedi and transform the Republic. Maul was just the assassin who cleared obstacles before being discarded. Sidious tortured Maul with Force lightning, electrocuting him until he was barely conscious, then had him imprisoned. The pain was meant to remind Maul of his place, to break whatever spirit remained after the humiliation of being defeated by his former master and witnessing his brother's death. The torture sessions were regular, systematic, designed both to extract information about the Shadow Collective and to simply inflict suffering because Sidious enjoyed watching his failed apprentice writhe in agony. Every session reminded Maul of his childhood training, but this was worse because there was no purpose beyond pain. no mission to justify the suffering, no hope that enduring would lead to anything except more torture. Mother Talzin attempted to rescue Maul, projecting herself across the galaxy, using Nightsister magic to fight Sidious directly. The confrontation between the Nightsister matriarch and the Dark Lord of the Sith was spectacular, two masters of different Force traditions battling with techniques the other couldn't fully counter. But Talzin's power, formidable as it was, proved insufficient against Sidious at the height of his abilities. He drove her off, though he was genuinely concerned by how close she'd come to defeating him. The encounter convinced Sidious that the Nightsisters represented a threat that needed to be eliminated permanently. He would eventually orchestrate Talzin's death, using Count Dooku and General Grievous to destroy her during a later confrontation. Maul remained imprisoned aboard Sidious's ship, undergoing torture that would have killed most beings. But Sith training had made him resilient, taught him to survive through hatred, to channel pain into dark side energy that sustained him when his body should have failed. He endured because he refused to give Sidious the satisfaction of breaking him completely, because some core of identity remained that wouldn't submit even to his former master. Eventually, opportunity came. Mandalorian warriors still loyal to Maul, remnants of Death Watch who'd accepted his leadership, staged a rescue operation. They attacked Sidious's forces, created enough chaos for Maul to escape his cell, and fled with him before the Sith Lord could prevent it. Free again, but utterly defeated, Maul went into hiding. The Shadow Collective was shattered, its component organizations scattered or destroyed by Sidious's interference. Death Watch was fractured beyond repair, split between Bo-Katan's traditionalist resistance and the remnants who'd followed Maul. Mandalore descended into civil war that would rage for years. Everything Maul had built, every accomplishment he'd achieved since his resurrection, was destroyed. He was alone again, hunted by both the Republic and the Separatists, marked for death by Sidious if he became too visible, forced back into the shadows where he'd spent so much of his existence. The final years of the Clone Wars saw Maul operating as a ghost, appearing occasionally in criminal operations or dark side activities, but never staying long enough to be cornered. He formed temporary alliances with other outcasts and criminals, using them for resources or information before abandoning them when they ceased being useful. Trust was a concept Maul had learned was fatal. Everyone he'd ever relied on had either died, betrayed him, or proven powerless to protect him. Sidious had discarded him twice. Savage was dead, killed by their former master. Mother Talzin would eventually be slain in a trap orchestrated by Sidious. Maul learned that isolation was survival, that caring about anyone gave enemies leverage, that attachment was a vulnerability he couldn't afford. But during this period, Maul began experiencing visions through the Force, seeing fragments of the future, glimpses of catastrophic events approaching. He saw the Clone Wars ending, saw the Republic transforming into something darker, saw the Jedi Order destroyed in fire and betrayal. Most significantly, he saw a figure, someone important, someone rising from desert sands to bring terrible change to the galaxy. The visions were fragmentary, unclear, but Maul became obsessed with understanding them. Who was this person? What role would they play in the coming transformation? How could Maul use this knowledge to survive, to gain revenge on Sidious, to finally achieve something lasting? His search for answers led him eventually to Malachor, the ancient Sith world where Sidious had taken him during his training decades earlier. Malachor housed a Sith temple built around a superweapon, a massive kyber crystal installation designed to destroy all life on the planet when activated. The temple also contained holocrons, ancient repositories of Sith knowledge, and Maul hoped they might provide answers to his visions. But he wasn't alone in seeking Sith knowledge. A small group of Jedi arrived. Kanan Jarrus, a knight who'd survived Order 66 as a Padawan, his apprentice Ezra Bridger, a teenager strong in the Force, and Ahsoka Tano, Anakin Skywalker's former Padawan who'd left the Jedi Order before its destruction. Maul approached them carefully, offering alliance against common enemies. He claimed to seek revenge against Sidious, which was true, and suggested they could work together to access the Temple's knowledge, which was partially true. The Jedi were skeptical, particularly Ahsoka, who sensed Maul's darkness immediately and recognized the danger he represented. But they needed what the Temple contained, needed any advantage against the Empire and the Sith who controlled it. The alliance was uneasy, built on mutual necessity rather than trust, with everyone understanding it would probably end in betrayal. Inside the Sith Temple, Maul and Ezra worked together to activate a Sith holocron, an ancient pyramid-shaped device that contained knowledge and could answer questions for those who accessed it properly. The holocron required both dark and light side users to activate fully, creating a strange partnership between the fallen Sith and the young Jedi Padawan. When activated, the holocron showed them visions, fragments of knowledge tailored to what each user most wanted to know. Ezra sought information about destroying the Sith. Maul sought the identity of the figure from his visions, the person who would be crucial to coming events. What Maul learned was tantalizing but incomplete. The holocron showed him images of twin suns, desert landscapes, and mentioned someone named Kenobi living in hiding. Maul's reaction was immediate and visceral. Obi-Wan Kenobi, the Jedi who'd cut him in half on Naboo, was alive, hidden somewhere, apparently protecting or connected to the mysterious figure from Maul's visions. The obsession with revenge that had driven his resurrection, that had been temporarily suppressed by other concerns, exploded back to the forefront of his mind. Everything else became secondary to finding Kenobi and finally completing the vengeance that had sustained him through decades of suffering. But the temple visit ended in chaos before Maul could learn more. Darth Vader arrived, hunting the Jedi with the single-minded determination that made him the Empire's most feared enforcer. Ahsoka Tano confronted her former master, recognizing Anakin Skywalker beneath the black armor despite his transformation into a Sith Lord. The duel between them was emotionally devastating. Master and apprentice who'd once fought side by side, now trying to kill each other. Maul used the distraction to escape, fleeing Malachor with the Sith holocron he and Ezra had activated. He'd gained valuable knowledge, but was also now hunted by Ezra's rebel cell, who understood he'd been using them and would continue being a threat. Maul tracked the rebels to their base, seeking the Jedi holocron they'd taken from Malachor to complement his Sith one. He also wanted to extract more information from Ezra's mind, to use the boy's connection to the holocron to pinpoint Kenobi's location. He captured members of the rebel crew, held them hostage, forced Ezra to combine the Sith and Jedi holocrons in a desperate attempt to gain the knowledge he sought. When the two holocrons were activated together, they created a powerful resonance, showing visions of the future to both users simultaneously. Ezra wanted to know how to destroy the Sith. Maul wanted to know where Kenobi was hiding. The combined holocrons revealed more than either expected. They showed twin suns, a desert planet unmistakably identified as Tatooine. They showed purpose, hope, a destiny waiting to unfold. Maul understood immediately. Kenobi was on Tatooine, the planet where they'd first fought 30 years earlier, the world where Maul had revealed himself to the Jedi and started the chain of events that led to his bisection and decades of suffering. Everything came full circle. The place where it began would be the place where it ended. But accessing the holocron's full power together had catastrophic consequences. The feedback from combining Sith and Jedi artifacts created an explosion of Force energy that destroyed both holocrons and nearly killed everyone present. The ancient knowledge contained within was lost, scattered into the Force, irretrievable. Maul escaped during the chaos, now with the knowledge he'd sought, but also aware that Ezra and his rebel allies would be hunting him. He'd used them, betrayed them, proven himself an enemy despite his offers of alliance. The pattern was familiar. Maul always ended up alone, always alienated potential allies through his inability to trust or cooperate genuinely. His journey to Tatooine was driven by singular, obsessive purpose. Find Kenobi. Confront him. Finally complete the revenge that had sustained Maul through decades of suffering, madness, and failure. He arrived on the desert planet and began searching, using the Force to sense his enemy's presence. But Tatooine was vast, and Kenobi had hidden himself well. Days passed as Maul wandered the dunes, calling out for his nemesis, taunting him, trying to draw him into confrontation. The desert was merciless, the twin suns beating down without pity, but Maul endured. He'd survived worse. He'd lived through bisection, madness, garbage planets, torture by Sidious himself. The Tatooine desert couldn't break him when so many other horrors had failed. Eventually, inevitably, the old Jedi appeared. Obi-Wan Kenobi walked through the desert toward Maul, his hood up against the sun, moving with the calm confidence of a man who'd found peace after years of turmoil. He looked older, weathered by time and exile, but he carried himself with grace that came from deep understanding rather than youthful arrogance. This wasn't the angry Padawan who'd cut Maul in half on Naboo. This wasn't even the grief-stricken Jedi Master who'd watched Duchess Satine die in his arms. This was someone who'd transcended those experiences, who'd found purpose beyond personal desires or attachments. Their conversation before the duel was brief, but loaded with meaning. Maul taunted Kenobi about his circumstances, calling him a desert rat, mocking how far the great Jedi Master had fallen. Living in isolation, hiding like a coward, reduced to scratching out existence on a backwater planet. But even as Maul spoke, he realized something. A Jedi of Kenobi's caliber wouldn't hide on Tatooine without reason. There was purpose here, something or someone worth protecting. Maul's eyes narrowed. "Look at what has become of you," he sneered. "A rat in the desert." But then understanding dawned. "Tell me, is it the Chosen One?" The question hung in the air between them. Kenobi's subtle shift in stance, the slight tension in his posture, told Maul everything he needed to know even before the Jedi spoke. "He is," Obi-Wan confirmed simply. The revelation should have been Maul's advantage, knowledge that could be exploited, leverage to use against his enemy. But instead, it sealed his fate. Kenobi would fight with absolute determination now, would protect the Chosen One with everything he had, and Maul had just made clear that he knew about Luke Skywalker's existence. There could be no walking away, no temporary truces, no possibility of Kenobi allowing Maul to leave with that knowledge. Both warriors ignited their lightsabers. Maul's weapon was a single-bladed saber now, his iconic double-bladed weapon having been destroyed years earlier. The crimson blade hummed with dark side energy. Kenobi's blue blade ignited in response, the color of the Jedi, the light side, hope itself. For a moment, Obi-Wan assumed a defensive stance, the posture he'd used throughout his career, the foundation of his Soresu form. But then something changed. He shifted into a different stance, holding his lightsaber differently, positioning himself in a way that was immediately recognizable to anyone who'd studied Jedi combat forms. He'd assumed Qui-Gon Jinn's fighting posture, the aggressive stance of Form 4, Ataru. Maul recognized it immediately. This was how Qui-Gon had stood during their duel on Naboo. 30 years earlier, Kenobi was honoring his fallen master, but he was also doing something more calculated. He was baiting Maul, showing him an opening, inviting him to attempt the same move that had killed Qui-Gon. The pommel strike to the face followed by a stab to the torso. Maul had used that technique to kill the Jedi Master, and Kenobi was daring him to try it again, offering himself as a target for the same attack. Maul took the bait. He couldn't resist. The opportunity to kill Kenobi using the same move that had killed his master, the poetry of it, the revenge, the satisfaction, all of it drove him forward. He attacked, his lightsaber moving in the familiar pattern, the pommel coming up toward Kenobi's face for the strike that would stun him and create the opening for the killing blow. But Obi-Wan had spent 3 decades thinking about that duel, analyzing every moment, understanding exactly how his master had died. When Maul attempted the pommel strike, Kenobi was ready. He deflected it with perfect timing and cut through both Maul's lightsaber hilt and his torso in a single flowing motion. The duel lasted 3 strikes, maybe 4 seconds of actual combat. It was over before it truly began. Maul collapsed, mortally wounded, his lightsaber destroyed, his body failing. Obi-Wan caught him as he fell, lowering him gently to the sand rather than letting him die alone in the dirt. The gesture was pure compassion, the act of a Jedi who understood that even enemies deserved dignity in death, that hatred served no purpose once the threat was eliminated. Maul looked up at Kenobi, surprise and something like gratitude flickering across his features. In all his long life, no one had ever shown him such kindness. Sidious had tortured him. Allies had betrayed him. Even his own mother's love had been expressed through dark magic and manipulation. But here, at the end, his greatest enemy held him with gentleness. "Is he the chosen one?" Maul asked, his voice weak, blood staining the sand beneath him. Obi-Wan confirmed it again. "He is." Maul's expression shifted, something like peace settling over his features. "He will avenge us," Maul whispered. The words were profound, revealing that in his final moments, Maul understood what his life had been about. He and Kenobi weren't truly enemies, not in the way that mattered. They were both victims of the Sith, pawns in Darth Sidious's grand scheme. Sidious had stolen Maul from his mother, had trained him in cruelty and pain, had used him as a weapon, and discarded him when he failed. Sidious had orchestrated the Clone Wars that destroyed Kenobi's world, had corrupted Anakin Skywalker into Darth Vader, had transformed the Republic into the Empire. Both of them had suffered because of Palpatine, had lost everything because of the Sith Lord's machinations. But the chosen one, Luke Skywalker, would destroy Sidious, would avenge all those the Sith had used and discarded, all those who'd been broken by Palpatine's schemes, Maul's suffering, Kenobi's exile, the destruction of the Jedi Order. All of it would be avenged when Luke faced the Emperor and destroyed the Sith once and for all. With that understanding, with that glimpse of justice yet to come, Darth Maul died. Obi-Wan closed his eyes with respect, honoring even this fallen enemy, recognizing that beneath the monster had once been a child who never had a choice about what he would become. The legacy of Darth Maul is complex and tragic. To the galaxy at large, he was barely known, a shadow that struck from darkness and disappeared. Most citizens of the Republic and later the Empire never heard his name, never knew he existed. But his impact rippled through history nonetheless. He was the first Sith revealed to the Jedi in a millennium, shattering their comfortable assumption that their ancient enemies were extinct. His appearance on Naboo marked the beginning of the Sith's final gambit, the start of events that would destroy the Republic and birth the Empire. To the criminal underworld, Maul became a legend, someone who'd risen from nothing to build the Shadow Collective, who'd conquered Mandalore itself, who'd survived being cut in half and lived for decades afterward through sheer hatred and determination. His methods, his ruthlessness, his willingness to unite disparate criminal organizations under single leadership all influenced how crime operated in the galaxy for generations. Even after his death, criminals studied his rise and fall, learned from his successes and failures, understood that power without sustainability was meaningless. For Mandalore, Maul's brief conquest had devastating long-term consequences. The civil war he sparked by killing Pre Vizsla and claiming the Darksaber continued long after Sidious defeated him. The planet was weakened, fractured, vulnerable to Imperial occupation when Palpatine consolidated his empire. The Mandalorian people, once proud warriors, became scattered refugees, their homeworld devastated, their culture nearly extinct. Maul's actions contributed directly to this catastrophe, making him a figure of hatred and shame in Mandalorian history, despite his technically legitimate claim to leadership through combat. For Force-sensitive individuals who learned his story, Maul became the ultimate cautionary tale about what happens when children are raised in darkness, when trauma compounds training in cruelty, when revenge becomes the only purpose sustaining someone's existence. His life demonstrated that the Sith philosophy, for all its promises of power and strength, delivered only suffering, isolation, and futility. Every power base he built crumbled. Every victory proved temporary. His quest for revenge consumed decades and accomplished nothing except his own death at the hands of the man he'd sought to destroy. Yet Maul also represented something important about the capacity for understanding, even at the end. His final words, his recognition that Luke would avenge both him and Obi-Wan, showed that even someone shaped entirely by darkness could glimpse larger patterns, could understand that their suffering was part of something beyond personal grudges. It wasn't redemption in the active sense that Anakin Skywalker achieved by choosing to save Luke and destroy Palpatine. Maul made no heroic sacrifice, performed no final good deed to balance his crimes, but he found clarity, understood his place in the larger story, recognized that justice would eventually come even if he wouldn't live to see it. Obi-Wan's compassion toward Maul in those final moments exemplified the difference between Jedi and Sith philosophers. The Jedi Master had every reason to hate Maul, who'd killed Qui-Gon, murdered Duchess Satine specifically to cause Obi-Wan pain, caused suffering across the galaxy for decades. But Obi-Wan saw past all of that to the truth. Maul had been a victim before becoming a victimizer, had been stolen as a child and shaped into a weapon, had never been given the chance to be anything else. That understanding didn't excuse Maul's crimes or erase the pain he'd caused, but it allowed compassion for the suffering being dying in the desert. Obi-Wan held him gently, closed his eyes with respect, gave him dignity in death that his life had never permitted. The broader implications of Maul's existence troubled philosophers and Force scholars for generations. He represented a being denied choice from the beginning, shaped into a monster by others' decisions. Was he responsible for his crimes when he'd never been given the opportunity to be anything else? The question had no easy answer. Maul made choices, embraced darkness enthusiastically at times, killed innocents without hesitation. But those choices were made by someone programmed from childhood to value violence and revenge, who'd been tortured into obedience, who literally knew no other way to be. The balance between victimhood and accountability, between what was done to him and what he chose to do himself, remained contested. What's undeniable is that Maul's story represents wasted potential. Here was a being with extraordinary Force abilities, exceptional intelligence, remarkable combat skills, strategic thinking that allowed him to build criminal empires from nothing. Imagine what he might have accomplished if those abilities had been directed toward constructive purposes, if he'd been trained by the Jedi instead of the Sith, if he'd been given choices instead of commands. The galaxy might have benefited from what Maul could have contributed, instead of suffering from what he destroyed. His tale reminds us that evil often begins not in choice, but in circumstances beyond individuals' control, that suffering creates suffering in endless cycles, that sometimes the only escape from those cycles is death. Standing before Darth Maul's complete story, examining his life from stolen childhood through decades of suffering to his final death in Tatooine's desert, we see a being who was simultaneously weapon and victim, monster and casualty of others' cruelty. He never had the chance to be anything except what Sidious made him, and that tragedy haunts his legacy more than any of his crimes. In the end, Maul found something resembling peace, held by a compassionate enemy who recognized their shared victimhood, understanding that his suffering would be avenged by the chosen one he'd sought throughout his final years. It was a quiet end for someone whose life had been defined by violence and fury, a moment of clarity after decades of blindness, a glimpse of justice before darkness claimed him forever. The Sith apprentice who'd been forged to kill Jedi died in a Jedi's arms, receiving in death the compassion and dignity his life had been denied. Perhaps that was the most important lesson of all, that even the darkest beings deserve compassion in their final moments, that understanding doesn't require forgiveness, that the cycle of hatred can end when someone chooses mercy over revenge. Thank you for exploring the complete lore of Darth Maul with me. If you enjoyed this deep examination into one of Star Wars' most tragic and complex characters, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more comprehensive explorations of the characters, locations, and events that shape the galaxy far, far away. May the Force be with you, always.